On the morning of my daughter's wedding, her fiancé leaned close and whispered, "Don't ask why. Tonight, watch what they place in front of you." Then he smiled and walked away like nothing had happened. Outside, 300 guests were arriving at our family estate. Upstairs, my daughter was laughing in her wedding dress. 20 minutes later, my attorney locked my study door, placed a folder on the desk, and said, "If we wait too long, this wedding may become your funeral. I'm so glad you found this." Seriously, take a second and leave a comment below. Where are you joining from? Your country, your city. Let's make this a conversation, not just a story. Worth mentioning, this story contains fictional elements built for thoughtful storytelling. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lesson underneath all of it is one worth carrying with you. The day my daughter was supposed to become a bride was the day I came closest to becoming a memory. I didn't know that yet. At 7:30 in the morning, when I came downstairs to the Hargrove Estate breakfast room in my robe and found the table already set, silver coffee pot steaming at the center, a basket of buttermilk biscuits still warm from the oven, the kind of spread that Eleanor used to arrange on mornings. She wanted to feel like everything in the world was in its right place. I stood in the doorway for a moment and let myself believe just briefly that it was. Walter. Preston Mercer was already at the table, dressed in his rehearsal day clothes, pressed khakis, a pale blue shirt, the easy, composed look of a man who never seemed to arrive anywhere unprepared. He stood when he saw me the way young men do when they've been raised to. "Good morning. I hope you don't mind. Savannah said you keep an early table." "I do," I said. I crossed to the coffee and poured myself a cup. "Where is she?" "Still upstairs with the hair and makeup team." He smiled, warm, easy, the smile I had seen him deploy on business partners and elderly aunts with equal practiced fluency. "She told me not to disturb her until 10 under any circumstances." I laughed, and it was genuine because that was entirely my daughter. Smart woman. We sat across from each other at the long breakfast table, just the two of us, the morning light coming in gold and clean through the east windows, the sounds of the estate beginning to stir beyond the doors. It was the kind of quiet that feels like a gift on a busy day, and I accepted it the way you accept gifts when you're 70, with gratitude and without assumption. Preston poured himself more coffee. We talked about the weather. October in Savannah had delivered, perfectly cool and bright, the kind of day that made the city look like a painting of itself. We talked about the reception timeline, about the groomsmen who had gotten lost the evening before, about a golf course in Augusta that Preston had played twice and wanted to take me to sometime in the spring. He was good at conversation. He had always been good at conversation, the kind of man who asks follow-up questions and remembers the answers and makes you feel without any single gesture you can point to that you are the most interesting person in the room. I had liked him for it. I had trusted him for it. At some point during the second cup of coffee, he set his cup down and glanced toward the door, a quick checking glance, the kind you make when you want to confirm that what you're about to do won't be witnessed. Then he reached under the table. It was a small movement, barely visible, his right hand dropping below the tablecloth, pressing something against the underside of the table near my side. A soft sound like tape being pressed flat. Then his hand came back up and he picked up his coffee cup again, and he continued the sentence he had been in the middle of about the Augusta golf course, without missing a single beat. I did not react. I have spent 40 years in boardrooms learning not to react to things that surprise me until I understand exactly what I am reacting to. We finished breakfast. Preston excused himself, something about confirming. The boutonniere delivery shook my hand with the firm two-pump grip he always used and left the room. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then I reached beneath the table. My fingers found it immediately, a small note card folded once taped flat against the inner leg near my place setting. I pulled it free and opened it under the edge of the tablecloth, The way I used to open notes passed to me in my father's church when I was 8 years old and thought I was being subtle. The handwriting was neat, unhurried block letters pressed firmly enough into the card that I could feel the indent of the pen on the back. Watch what gets placed in front of you tonight. Some things offered as gifts are not meant to be accepted. No name, no explanation, nothing on the reverse side. I read it twice. Then I folded it and slid it into the breast pocket of my robe against my chest and sat for a long moment, with both hands flat on the table and the morning light falling across the empty breakfast dishes. A man who leaves a warning without his name on it is not a man trying to help you. He is a man trying to help himself. I understood that clearly and immediately, the way you understand certain things at 70 that would have taken you weeks to process at 40. The question was not whether Preston meant the warning. The question was why he needed to deliver it this way, anonymous, deniable, a whisper, instead of a conversation, and what that told me about everything that was coming after it. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't notice until I picked it up. I set it back down and reached for my phone instead. Caroline Whitfield had been my attorney for 23 years. She had helped me structure the Hargrove family trust draft, Eleanor's estate documents, and navigate 2 hostile acquisition attempts in the mid-2000s that would have broken a less methodical woman. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had already been awake. "Walter," she said. No greeting, no preamble. Caroline had always treated pleasantries as an inefficiency. "You're calling early. I need you here," I said. "Today, before the ceremony." A pause, very brief, the pause of a woman recalibrating. How serious? I looked down at the breast pocket where the note card sat against my chest. "Serious enough that I'd rather tell you in person." "I'm already getting my coat," she said, and hung up. I sat alone in the breakfast room while the estate woke up around me, caterers arriving through the service entrance, florists carrying arrangements through the East Hall, the distant sound of Savannah laughing about something upstairs, in a voice so bright and unguarded, it made my chest ache in a way I could not yet fully explain. I loved my daughter completely. I had never once doubted that. But the note card in my pocket was telling me something I didn't want to hear about a day I had spent 14 months looking forward to, and a man sitting across my breakfast table who had smiled at me with both hands already in motion. I straightened my robe. I picked up my cold coffee and drank it anyway, and I began quietly and without urgency to pay attention. I had been sitting on the edge of my bed for 20 minutes before I trusted myself to think clearly. I stayed at that window for a long time, after Preston left long enough for the catering crew to finish unloading 2 more vans, long enough for Savannah to disappear back inside, long enough for the jazz quartet to stop warming up and start playing something that sounded almost cheerful. Almost. I pulled my jacket on, buttoned it slowly, and thought about what Preston had just told me. A man who had every reason in the world to stay quiet had just knocked on my door and handed me a warning he couldn't fully explain. Either he was the most genuinely decent person I'd ever met, or he was something else entirely. The problem was, both possibilities felt equally real, and I'd been wrong about people before. The almond allergy wasn't a secret. My medical alert bracelet was engraved with it. Eleanor had spent 20 years checking ingredient labels at every restaurant we visited. My primary care physician had updated my file after the second anaphylactic episode 8 years ago, severe systemic reaction. EpiPen required, emergency room, the works. Everyone in my immediate circle knew. My estate manager knew. My housekeeper knew. Savannah had known since she was old enough to understand what a hospital was. The question sitting in my chest like a stone wasn't whether the allergy could kill me. It could. A concentrated dose of almond paste in a single slice of cake with no EpiPen nearby in a crowded reception hall, where the first symptom might look like nothing more than a man feeling unwell after a rich meal, was entirely capable of being a death sentence dressed up as an accident. The question was whether my daughter was the kind of person Who could plan that? I sat down on the edge of the bed and let myself ask it straight the way I'd always forced myself to ask hard questions in business. Not around it, not softened. Straight through the center. Was Savannah capable of planning to kill me? The answer that came back was the one I'd spent the last 40 minutes trying to outrun. I didn't know. I told her everything Preston had said. I kept it factual, kept my voice level, the same way I'd delivered bad news to boards of directors my entire professional life. When I finished, the line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then Caroline said, "Walter, sit down. I'm already sitting." "Good." Another pause, shorter this time. "I need to tell you something I should have told you 6 months ago. I want you to understand that I was honoring Eleanor's wishes in not telling you sooner, and I believe she was right to ask me to wait. But given what you've just described, I can't wait any longer." My grip tightened on the phone. "Caroline, what are you telling me?" "Before Eleanor passed," Caroline said, her voice measured and careful, "she asked me to keep a quiet eye on Savannah's finances. She never explained exactly why, just said she had a feeling and that she'd rather be wrong than unprepared. I've been monitoring for 6 years, Walter. Discreetly. Nothing actionable for the first 3 years. A beat. And then things changed." "How much?" I asked. It was the only question that mattered. $2.3 million, Caroline said. Total accumulated debt. The breakdown is online gambling accounts, cryptocurrency speculation losses, and 2 private lenders operating outside the banking system. The kind of lenders who don't send collection notices. They send other things. The number landed in the room like a physical object. I sat with it for a moment, feeling the weight of it. 2.3 million, I repeated. The private lenders, the ones at the end of that chain, gave Savannah a deadline. Caroline continued. 48 hours from midnight last night. Which means she has until midnight tonight to produce payment, or they escalate. And when those kinds of organizations escalate, Walter, they don't just go after the borrower. They go after everyone around her, I said. Yes, I got up and walked to the window again. Downstairs, the estate was alive with preparation, florists, caterers, a woman in a gray dress directing the chair arrangement with a clipboard. All of it moving forward, oblivious like a clock that didn't know it was broken. Caroline. I said, if I die today, what happens to the estate? Under the current will Savannah inherits the majority of Hargrove properties and your liquid assets within 60 days of probate. The total value conservatively estimated at current market, $80 to $85 million. Enough to clear $2.3 million and have $78 million left over. Yes, and if my death appeared to be an allergic reaction at a catered event, accidental cross-contamination, something the kitchen didn't catch, it would be investigated, Caroline said carefully. But given your documented medical history and the general chaos of a 300-person reception, it would be a difficult case to prosecute. These things do happen, Walter. Tragically. Juries understand that. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass of the window. Down in the garden, one of the florists was attaching white roses to the arch, where Savannah would stand in 7 hours and say her vows. Caroline, I said, I need you here, now, and I need you to bring everything you have. She didn't hesitate. I'm already getting my coat. One more thing. I turned away from the window. Don't come through the front gate. Use the side entrance, the one off Whitaker Street. Park on the street and come through the garden door. Understood. Her voice shifted just slightly, the warmth dialing back, the attorney clicking into place. Walter, whatever we find in the next few hours, whatever it turns out to be, you are not facing it alone. Are we clear? I looked at the photo of Eleanor on the dresser. At her laughing face permanently frozen in that afternoon in the Blue Ridge Mountains, when neither of us could have imagined any of this. We're clear, I said. Hurry. Caroline Whitfield arrived just before 9, earlier than I expected, which told me she had left the moment we hung up and driven faster than she should have. She came through the garden door off Whitaker Street exactly as I'd asked. She arrived without ceremony, no drama, no fuss, just the quiet efficiency of a woman who had spent 40 years solving problems that other people thought were unsolvable. She carried the same black leather briefcase she had brought to Eleanor's funeral, the one I had come to think of as the bag she reserved for days when the stakes were real. I met her at the side entrance and brought her through the back hallway to my study on the ground floor. The room with the heavy oak door and the curtains I hadn't opened yet. I locked the door behind us. She set the briefcase on the desk, clicked it open, and looked at me with the kind of steady focus that had always made her one of the most formidable people I'd ever known. "Before I show you what I have," she said, "I want you to tell me exactly what Preston said to you this morning. Word for word, as close as you can get, Anne." I told her. I kept it precise. When I finished, she pressed her lips together and nodded slowly, the way she did when something confirmed what she already suspected. "All right," she said. "Then it's time." She reached into the briefcase and drew out a manila folder thick with printed pages and laid it on the desk between us. 6 years ago, when Eleanor asked me to monitor Savannah's finances, I set up a quiet arrangement through the family trust. Caroline began. Eleanor was one of the trustees, and as co-trustee after her passing, I retained limited oversight authority over accounts tied to Hargrove family assets. It gave me a legal window into certain transactions without requiring Savannah's knowledge or consent. Eleanor never told me she did that. I said, my chest tightening. She didn't want to worry you unless there was something to worry about. Caroline tapped the folder. For the first 3 years, there wasn't. Small irregularities here and there, nothing that crossed a line. But starting about 30 months ago, the pattern changed. She opened the folder and turned it to face me. "I want you to look at these figures, Walter." I looked. The numbers swam in front of me for a moment before my brain organized them into meaning. Transfers, withdrawals, account names I didn't recognize. "Walk me through it," I said, my voice coming out rough at the edges. "Online gambling offshore accounts, mostly poker and sports betting platforms, registered in jurisdictions outside U.S. regulatory oversight," Carolyn said, pointing to the first column. Losses began small, a few thousand here, 10,000 there. By the end of year 1, she was down $240,000. My jaw tightened. She told me she was investing. She was in a manner of speaking. The second column, cryptocurrency speculation. 3 separate investment platforms, 2 of which were later flagged by the SEC as high-risk schemes. She put in $460,000 over 14 months and recovered less than $60,000. I pressed my hand flat on the desk to keep it steady. "And the rest? Private lenders." Caroline's voice didn't soften because she knew I didn't need it softened. 2 separate parties operating outside the banking system. The kind of arrangements that don't appear in credit bureau reports. The combined principal she borrowed was $900,000. She paused. With interest and penalty fees accumulated over 18 months, the current outstanding balance is approximately $1.6 million, which brings the total to $2.3 million, Caroline said. "Give or take." I stood up from the desk and walked to the window. Outside, the gardeners were trimming the hedges along the south wall. A completely ordinary Saturday morning task on what should have been a completely ordinary Saturday morning. "The private lenders," I said without turning around. "What kind of people are we talking about?" "The kind who don't file civil suits when payments are missed," Caroline said carefully. "I made some discreet inquiries through a contact I trust at the U.S. Attorney's Office. The organization behind the larger loan has been flagged in connection with 2 other debt collection incidents in the Southeast in the past 18 months. One resulted in a hospitalization. One resulted in a disappearance that was never officially resolved." I turned back to face her. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "They threatened her. They gave her a deadline, Walter. 48 hours from midnight last night, which expires at midnight tonight." Caroline held my gaze. If she doesn't produce $2.3 million by the time that clock runs out, they've indicated they will escalate. And based on what I know about this organization, escalation means they go after everyone connected to her, including you, including any assets in her name or yours. I walked back to the desk and sat down heavily. The chair creaked under me the way it always did, a sound so familiar it felt obscene right now. "There's one more thing," Carolyn said. She reached back into the briefcase and pulled out a second sheet, a single-page printed bank statement, one transaction highlighted in yellow. 3 days ago, Savannah transferred $10,000 to an individual named Dale Sutton. Mr. Sutton is listed on the catering company's staff roster for today's reception as sous chef. The name hit me like cold water. She bought someone on the catering staff, $10,000 as a first installment, with another $10,000 promised upon completion, is consistent with what someone in that position might accept for a task they believed was minor, Carolyn said. I don't believe Mr. Sutton understands the full nature of what he's agreed to do. Based on everything I know about how Savannah framed this, she likely told him it was harmless, a small prank, something that would make you mildly uncomfortable at worst. My throat tightened. She told him it wouldn't kill me. That would be my assessment, yes. I sat with that for a moment. The image of Savannah, my daughter, explaining to a stranger how to poison her father while carefully reassuring him that no real harm would come of it. The precision of it. The coldness of it. "Caroline," I said, "if we call the police right now, what happens?" She set down her pen. "With what we currently have, a bank transfer, a family trust monitoring report, and a second-hand account from Preston, a DA in Chatham County, would have a difficult time securing an arrest warrant, let alone an indictment. Georgia law requires demonstrable evidence of an overt act in furtherance of a conspiracy to commit murder. A wire transfer to a catering employee and an overheard phone call won't clear that bar. So we need to catch Dale in the act. We need the physical evidence, the almond paste Dale in possession of it, ideally a direct statement. At that point, combined with what I already have, the case becomes significantly stronger." I looked at her. "Which means the wedding has to go forward." "Yes," she said, "it does. And I have to walk my daughter down the aisle knowing what she's planned." Caroline reached across the desk and covered my hand with hers, just for a second, firm and brief, the way Eleanor used to when she knew words weren't adequate. "You are the strongest person I have ever represented, Walter Hargrove. And yes, you have to." I pulled my hand back, straightened in the chair, and did what I had done every time a deal went sideways in 4 decades of business. I stopped feeling and started planning. "Tell me what you need from me," I said. Caroline almost smiled. "I need you to go downstairs, eat breakfast, and be the happiest father at any wedding this city has ever seen." She stood to go, then paused at the door. One hand on the frame, she turned back. "Walter, one question. How well do you actually know Preston Mercer?" I frowned. "Well enough. Why?" She considered me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Just a question," she said. "For now." Caroline left through the garden door the same way she came in, and I stood alone in my study with the oak door locked and a manila folder full of numbers that had rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes to feel the full weight of it. The $2.3 million, the private lenders, the $10,000 wired to a man named Dale Sutton, who was probably at this moment arranging silver platters in my kitchen without the faintest idea that he'd been recruited into a murder. 5 minutes to feel the grief of it, the specific grief of learning that someone you raised, someone you loved without condition or calculation, had looked at you and seen a financial obstacle to be removed. Then I unlocked the door and went to find Marcus to ask about breakfast. By 8:45, Caroline was back through the garden door again, briefcase in hand, moving with the brisk purpose of someone who had already mapped out the next 6 hours in her head. I had coffee waiting. She waved it off. "Here's what I've been thinking. she said, pulling her chair close to the desk and spreading out 2 sheets of paper, a hand-drawn floor plan of the estate's ground floor and the printed staff roster for the catering company. She pointed to a name halfway down the list. Dale Sutton. Sous chef, 8 years with the catering company, clean record, 2 daughters, recently divorced. He lives in Pooler, about 20 minutes from here. How do you know about the daughters? I asked. I have a paralegal who works very quickly on Saturday mornings, she said without looking up. The point is, Mr. Sutton is not a professional criminal. He is a man in financial difficulty who was offered $10,000 to do something he was told was harmless. That matters because when the moment comes, he will not be hard to break. And when is the moment? Dessert service. The wedding cake is plated individually by table assignment. Your slice marked Father of the Bride will be prepared separately from the rest. That's the one he'll target. She tapped the floor plan. The dessert staging area is here in the east corridor off the main hall. It's accessible from the kitchen and from the ballroom, but during the reception, it won't be heavily trafficked. That's where he'll make his move. I studied the floor plan, and you'll be watching him all evening, from the moment he arrives until the moment he touches that cake. Caroline looked up. But Walter, I need you to understand something. We cannot intervene too early. The moment I see him reach for whatever he's been given to use, only then do we move. If we approach him before he makes an overt attempt, we lose the evidentiary value. So we let him get close, I said. We let him get close, she confirmed. You will not eat anything from that dessert course under any circumstances. Your EpiPen. Left breast pocket, I said. I put it there this morning. She nodded, satisfied. Good. After we intercept Dale, I'll take his statement while you handle Savannah privately, in a closed room before any law enforcement arrives. I want her to have the opportunity to speak freely on her own terms before attorneys and recorders become part of the picture. You want her confession? I said. I want her truth, Carolyn said quietly. Those aren't always the same thing, but tonight I believe they will be. She gathered her papers. Once we have Dale's statement, and whatever Savannah tells you in that room, I'll make the call. The Chatham County Sheriff's Office has a duty detective on weekends. What we'll have by then will be more than enough for an arrest warrant. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the ceiling. 300 guests, I said. Business partners. People who've known me since before Savannah was born. Yes, and we're going to let them sit through an entire wedding reception while all of this is happening. They'll have a story to tell for the rest of their lives, Caroline said dryly. Southerners love that. Despite everything, despite the folder on the desk and the name Dale Sutton, and the $2.3 million and the almond paste in the cake that was supposed to be made for my daughter's wedding, I almost laughed. The almost felt like something Eleanor would have appreciated. One more thing, I said. You keep asking about Preston. Caroline set her briefcase down and looked at me steadily. I do. Tell me why. She was quiet for a beat, not hesitating, I thought, but choosing. When I was pulling Savannah's financial records, I noticed something peripheral. A pattern of communications between Savannah and Preston in the 18 months before the gambling losses escalated. I haven't fully analyzed it yet. It may be nothing. But you don't think it's nothing. I think Preston Mercer is a very composed man, she said. And I think composed men who show up at 7 in the morning to deliver warnings they could have delivered the night before deserve a second look. She picked up her briefcase. I'll have more information by this evening. Let's focus on Dale for now. She moved toward the door. I followed her out into the main hallway, the wide corridor, with the family portraits running along the east wall. Hargroves going back 4 generations, all of them looking down with the particular gravity of people who believed that the name above the door meant something. I watched Carolyn disappear through the side passage toward the garden, and then I turned toward the front of the house. Through the tall windows at the end of the hall, I could see the catering trucks parked along the circular drive. 3 of them white with the company logo in navy blue. Staff members in black uniforms were moving equipment from the vehicles to the service entrance on the north side of the house. I stood at the window and watched them work, and then I saw it. Preston was standing near the second truck, tucked just slightly behind the open rear door, far enough from the house that you wouldn't notice him unless you were looking. He had his phone in one hand, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He was talking to a man in a black catering uniform, heavy-set mid-40s with a gray-streaked beard. The conversation lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then Preston clapped the man once on the shoulder, the easy, familiar gesture of someone greeting an old acquaintance, and walked back toward the house. The man in the catering uniform watched him go, then turned and carried a stack of serving trays through the service entrance. I had never seen that man before in my life. But something in the way he moved, deliberate, unhurried, like a man who knew exactly where he was going and exactly what he was there to do, made the back of my neck go cold. I pulled out my phone and texted Caroline 4 words, "Find Dale Sutton now." Her response came back in under a minute, gray beard. "I see him." By 10 o'clock that morning, Hargrove Estate had transformed into something out of a magazine spread. White roses climbing the garden arch. Linen tablecloths catching the breeze off the Savannah River. The florist's crew moving through the grounds with the quiet precision of people who did beautiful things for a living and took pride in every detail. Standing at the edge of the upper terrace, watching it all come together, a man who didn't know what I knew would have felt nothing but gratitude. I had known for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I had not yet managed a single bite of breakfast. I was standing near the terrace railing when I heard her voice behind me. "Ba always said the estate looked best in October." I turned around. Savannah stood in the doorway, in her silk robe, hair pinned loosely, a cup of coffee cradled in both hands. Her eyes were bright, her color high, her smile the kind that reached all the way up into the corners of her eyes. She looked like the happiest woman alive. She looked exactly like Eleanor on the morning of our own wedding 38 years ago, and the similarity hit me somewhere behind the sternum with the force of a closed fist. "He was right," I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice came out. "It does." She crossed the terrace and stood beside me, leaning her shoulder into mine the way she'd done since she was small enough to fit under my arm. For a moment, we just looked out at the grounds together. The white chairs, the flower arch, the river glittering in the distance. "You nervous?" I asked. She laughed softly, and even that sounded genuine. A little, more excited than nervous. She tilted her head against my shoulder. "Are you?" "Fathers are always nervous," I said. "It's in the job description." She laughed again, then straightened up and looked at me with an expression that made my chest ache, open, warm, full of something that looked exactly like love. "I have something I want to read to you before the ceremony," she said. "Mom left a letter for my wedding day. I've been carrying it around for 6 years, and I've been too afraid to open it. But last night I finally did." Her voice caught just slightly on the last few words, her eyes going bright with tears that spilled over before she could stop them. "I want to share it with you. Is that okay?" Something in my throat closed up completely. I forced it back open. "Of course it is." She pulled a folded envelope from the pocket of her robe, soft at the creases from being handled many times, the kind of paper that had been carried close to someone's body for a long while. She unfolded it with hands that trembled just slightly, and I watched her take a slow breath before she began to read. Eleanor's handwriting, Eleanor's voice, coming out of Savannah's mouth on the morning of a day that was supposed to be the best day of our lives. The letter talked about the day Savannah was born, about watching her grow up with my stubbornness and Eleanor's instinct for beauty. It talked about marriage not in the greeting card way, but honestly the way Eleanor always spoke about the unglamorous work of choosing someone every single morning, even when it's hard. It ended with 3 sentences that made Savannah's voice break entirely. "Be brave enough to be loved fully. Don't keep yourself small to make room for someone else's fear. And know that your father and I are prouder of you than either of us has ever been able to say." Savannah folded the letter with shaking hands, pressed it against her lips for a moment, then looked up at me with tears running openly down her face, not bothering to stop them. "I miss her so much," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "Every single day, but especially today." I pulled her into my arms and held her, and she cried against my shoulder the way she had at Eleanor's funeral, and I pressed my cheek against her hair and said, "I know, baby. Me too." And I meant it. God help me, I meant it completely. Because that was the most agonizing part of those 3 hours. Not the anger, not the dread, but the love. The love that was still completely real, still entirely present, running right alongside the knowledge of what she had arranged to happen to me tonight. I held my daughter while she cried over her mother's letter, and somewhere beneath the grief and the tenderness was a cold, clear question I could not silence. Was any of this real, or was this the best performance I had ever witnessed? I didn't know. And not knowing was its own kind of devastation. The morning moved forward, the way mornings do, unstoppable, indifferent. The hair and makeup team arrived for Savannah at 11. The groomsmen gathered on the south lawn for photographs at 11:30. I shook hands and smiled and said the right things to the right people with the mechanical competence of a man who had been performing in public since before most of these guests were born. At 12:45, I was standing near the garden entrance talking to an old business partner named Thomas Reeves when I caught Carolyn's eye across the crowd. She was positioned near the east corridor, close enough to the service entrance that she could see anyone moving between the kitchen and the grounds, wearing a pale blue dress that made her look like any other well-dressed guest. She gave me a small nod. Everything was in position. I was in the middle of telling Thomas something about the Atlanta commercial market when I became aware of being watched. I turned my head slightly casually, the way you do when you feel it before you see it. And there was Dale Sutton, 20 feet away, carrying a tray of pre-reception canapés toward the cocktail tables. He was in full catering uniform, black jacket, white shirt, gray-streaked beard, and he was looking directly at me. Not the way a server looks at a guest. Not the professional appraisal of someone trying to anticipate a request. He was looking at me the way a man looks at something he's committed to doing and is trying to convince himself he can go through with it. Heavy, uncertain, and full of something that might have been guilt if he'd had more information than Savannah had given him. Our eyes met for 2 full seconds. Then he looked away, adjusted the tray, and continued toward the cocktail tables, as if nothing had happened. "Walter," Thomas was watching me with concern. "You all right?" I smiled at him, and felt the smile reach my eyes with the precision of 40 years of practice. "Just taking it all in," I said. "It goes fast, Thomas, that's all. They say a father's hardest walk is the one down the aisle giving away the person he spent a lifetime protecting. I always assumed that meant grief. The ordinary, honest grief of transition, watching your child step into a life that is no longer centered on you. I had prepared for that grief. I had even welcomed it the way you welcome a sadness that is really just love wearing different clothes. I was not prepared for this. The processional music started at 2 o'clock, exactly a live string quartet, playing something classical and achingly beautiful that Eleanor had once said should be played at every important moment in a person's life. 300 guests rose to their feet. The flower arch at the end of the garden aisle was covered in white roses and trailing greenery framing the sky behind it in a way that was almost aggressively beautiful. And Savannah appeared at my arm, radiant and trembling slightly, her dress a sweep of ivory silk that caught the October light like it had been designed for exactly this afternoon. "Ready?" I asked her quietly. She looked up at me, eyes bright and wet at the edges. "I think so," she said. "Are you?" "Always," I said. And I took her hand and put it through my arm, and we walked 30 feet. Maybe 35. The length of a short room. I have signed contracts that took longer to complete. I have sat through board meetings that lasted 9 hours, but I have never in my life experienced 30 feet that cost me more to walk than those did. On my left, my daughter, her hand warm and light on my arm, her breathing slow and deliberate, the way it gets when she's managing nerves. The same breathing pattern she'd had before her law school entrance exams, before her first big professional presentation, before every significant moment I'd watched her walk toward and come out the other side of stronger. On my right, 300 people who loved this family, who had known Eleanor, who had watched Savannah grow up and were here today to celebrate what they believed was the beginning of something wonderful. And straight ahead, Preston Mercer standing at the altar in his black tuxedo, his expression open and warm, his eyes on Savannah with the exact look a man should have when the woman he loves is walking toward him. I handed Savannah to him at the altar. He took her hand with both of his, a gentle, deliberate gesture, and looked at me over her shoulder with an expression of such apparent gratitude that my chest contracted sharply. "Thank you, Walter," he said quietly, "just for me." I nodded and took my seat in the front row. The ceremony lasted 42 minutes. I know because I checked my watch at the start, and again at the end, the way I used to time presentations. I needed something concrete to hold on to. The officiant was a minister named Reverend Howard Barnes, who had known our family for 20 years. He spoke about commitment and courage and the particular kind of trust that marriage requires. He quoted scripture. He asked the guests to reflect on the relationships in their own lives that had shaped them. Several people in the rows behind me were openly weeping by the midpoint. I kept my hands folded in my lap and my face composed, and I watched my daughter marry a man I was beginning to suspect was something far more dangerous than a son-in-law. During the exchange of vows, I felt my phone vibrate once against my thigh. Caroline. I didn't look at it until the applause started, the moment Preston kissed Savannah, and the whole garden erupted in the particular joyful noise of 300 people who had been holding their breath and finally let it go. Under cover of the noise and movement, I glanced down at the screen. Dale went into the kitchen during the vows, came back out with something in his jacket pocket. Couldn't see what. Staying close. I typed back with one thumb, understood. Stay on him. The reception line formed immediately after the ceremony, a long, slow procession of guests, offering congratulations, hugs, handshakes. I stood beside Savannah and Preston and accepted every one of them with the grace my mother had drilled into me before I turned 16. I smiled until my face ached. I called people by their names and asked about their families and said, "We're just thrilled." So many times the phrase stopped having meaning. Preston stood at my right shoulder through the whole of it, easy and charming, working the line with the fluency of a natural politician. He remembered names he laughed at the right moments he put his arm around Savannah and pulled her close when the photographs happened. The perfect groom at his perfect wedding. At one point during the brief break in the line, he leaned toward me and said, "You holding up okay? You look a little tired." I looked at him, examined his face with the same careful attention I had given it in my bedroom at 7 that morning. He looked genuinely concerned. He looked like a man who cared whether I was all right. "I'm fine," I said. 70 years old at a 5-hour event. A man's entitled to look a little tired. He grinned that easy, practiced grin and clapped me once on the upper arm. "You've been incredible today, Walter. I mean that." The reception shifted to the main hall at 5 o'clock. Guests filtered inside champagne appeared the jazz quartet set up in the corner and began something low and warm. The estate staff moved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres, Dale Sutton among them, precise and professional and invisible, the way good service staff always are. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray and did not drink it. I carried it through the room like a prop, stopping to talk, to laugh, to shake hands, to be Walter Hargrove, patriarch widower, proud father of the bride. The performance of my life given before the largest audience I had ever played to. I was midway through a conversation with a group of Atlanta investors when I saw Savannah across the room watching me. Just for a second, a flicker of something in her eyes before she turned back to her guests, with a smile so bright it lit up the corner of the room. That flicker, that single unguarded half-second. I had seen that expression before. Not often, not recently. But I recognized it from the 2 or 3 moments in Savannah's life when she had been caught between wanting something badly and knowing the price of it was too high. I had seen it on her face at 17, when she wanted to drop out of the science program she loved, because the boy she liked wasn't in it. I had seen it when Eleanor was sick in the hospital corridor the moment before she walked in to say goodbye. It was the face of someone fighting a war inside themselves, and for one terrible, merciful second, I let myself believe that the war wasn't over yet. My phone buzzed again. Caroline. He's been to the dessert staging area twice. Something's in his left jacket pocket. It's time to get ready, Walter. I slipped the phone back into my breast pocket right next to the EpiPen I had put there at 7 that morning and prayed I would not need. The jazz quartet shifted into something with a little more pace and the room brightened around it. And across the hall, my daughter laughed at something her new husband said and tilted her head back the way she always did when something genuinely delighted her. And I watched her, and I loved her, and I got ready for what was coming. By 5 o'clock, Hargrove Estate had transformed into something from the final page of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers threw warm gold light across 300 guests in evening clothes. Champagne flutes caught the glow and scattered it in small bright points across the white tablecloths. The jazz quartet had moved from the garden into the far corner of the main hall, playing something low and unhurried, the kind of music designed to make a room feel like it has always been this beautiful and always will be. White flowers on every surface, silver trays moving through the crowd with the quiet precision of a well-rehearsed performance. I had spent 40 years learning to perform in rooms exactly like this one. Tonight I gave the best performance of my life. Walter. Gerald Ashton caught me near the entrance, his broad hand extended, his face creased with the kind of genuine warmth that only comes from knowing someone through decades of real things, business failures and family losses, and all the ordinary difficult years in between. You look wonderful. Eleanor would have been so proud of this evening. She would have, I said, and I meant it completely, and I moved on. That was how the first hour went, name by name, face by face, the long ceremony of being Walter Hargrove at his daughter's wedding reception. A handshake here, a laugh there. We're just thrilled. Yes, she's absolutely radiant. 40 years in this house, and I've never seen it look better. I said each of these things with the practiced fluency of a man who had spent his entire professional life making other people feel that the most important thing in the world was whatever was happening right in front of them. My face cooperated. My voice cooperated. The rest of me was somewhere else entirely cataloging exits, monitoring movement, running through the evening sequence with the cold, methodical focus of a man who knew exactly what was coming and needed to be ready for every version of it. Business partners from Atlanta filled a cluster of tables near the east windows. Men I had worked alongside for 20 years, whose children had grown up alongside Savannah, who raised their glasses when I passed and said things like, "This is exactly what she deserves, and you must be so happy, Walter." I told them I was. I shook their hands, and I told them I was. Caroline passed me once near the corridor entrance, close enough to speak without stopping. Voice low and completely level, the voice of a woman delivering a routine status update in a high-stakes negotiation. Dale went into the refrigeration area again. Third time in 40 minutes. He's not retrieving anything. A half-beat pause. He's checking position. How close is he to the staging area? I asked. My lips barely moved. Close enough, she said, and continued walking. I shifted my champagne to my left hand and turned back to the room. At the far end of the hall, Savannah and Preston stood together, receiving a line of guests, she in her ivory dress, With the train gathered at her side, he in his black tuxedo, with the white boutonniere she had chosen herself from the florist's catalog in August. They were objectively a beautiful pair. She laughed at something an older woman said, and touched the woman's arm with both hands, that instinctive, generous gesture of hers, the one that made people feel genuinely seen rather than socially processed. I had watched her do it her entire life. I had always thought of it as one of the best things about her. I watched her do it now and felt three things simultaneously: love, grief, and the cold, analytical portion of my mind that refused to stop working, running on three separate channels that would not merge no matter how hard I pressed them together. Preston caught my eye across the hall. He gave me a small, easy nod, the nod of a man communicating that everything was proceeding exactly as expected, that the evening was on course, that there was nothing to worry about. I returned the nod with the same ease, and I thought about what Caroline had told me that morning. Composed men who show up to deliver warnings they could have delivered the night before deserve a second look. 20 minutes later, Savannah appeared beside me, sliding her hand through my arm in the way she had done since she was small enough to fit entirely beneath it. Her perfume was the same one she had worn since she was 22, a birthday gift from Eleanor, that she had ordered by the case every year since. The familiarity of it hit me somewhere I was not prepared for. "Are you having a good time, Dad?" she asked. Her eyes were bright. Her smile reached all the way up. There was nothing in her face I could point to and name as performance, and that was precisely what made it so difficult. "A wonderful time," I said. "You've done everything beautifully." She squeezed my arm one firm, warm press, then moved back toward her guests. I watched her go, and I thought about what it cost to love someone this completely while knowing what I knew. The cocktail hour wound toward its close. The room had the particular restlessness of 300 people sensing the next phase, approaching conversations growing slightly louder. Eyes moving toward the dessert alcove, a collective turning of attention toward what came next. I had been monitoring Dale Sutton for 90 minutes. His movement through the hall was wrong in a way that was invisible unless you were specifically watching for it. On the surface, he was a catering professional working his section, efficient, unobtrusive, the kind of staff presence that blends into the event so completely that guests stop registering him as a person and start registering him as a function. But his path through the room kept returning to the same corner. Not because his duties required it, not because the traffic patterns of the event pulled him there. Something else was pulling him there, the same gravitational force that makes a man glance repeatedly at a door he is waiting to walk through. He had been to the kitchen and back 4 times in the last hour. He carried trays out. He came back empty. He went to the kitchen again. The rhythm of it was slightly too frequent, slightly too purposeful for the pace of what was actually being served. I set my untouched champagne on a passing tray. A server named Raymond, I had noted his name tag during the venue walkthrough that morning, moved past me with a tray of empty glasses, and I stopped him. "Raymond, the dessert service, what's the sequence from here?" "Cake cutting in about an hour, sir," he said. "We'll begin staging the individual portions in approximately 30 minutes. The father of the bride plate will be positioned first per the service brief." "Thank you," I said. "Everything looks excellent tonight." He moved on. I stood still and let the information settle. 30 minutes before staging. Which meant Dale Sutton had approximately 30 minutes to do what he had come here to do, and he knew it as well as I did. I found Caroline again near the edge of the room and exchanged 4 words as I passed her. 30 minutes. Stay close. Her response was a single nod barely visible. I moved toward the east end of the hall to position myself, making it look like a natural drift toward the quieter side of the room, the way a man does when he wants a moment away from the noise. A couple stopped me halfway and asked about the estate's history, and I gave them 6 minutes of the story I had given 1,000 times, and I smiled, and I watched Dale Sutton over the woman's shoulder the entire time. He had stopped moving through the crowd, He was standing near the service door to the kitchen tray in hand, face turned slightly away from the room, his body very still, in the way that bodies get still when a person is waiting for a specific thing to happen. The MC raised his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be moving into our dessert service and cake cutting in approximately 1 hour. Please enjoy." Applause moved through the room like a wave. 300 people lifting their glasses, turning toward the head table, smiling at the bride and groom, who stood and waved and looked in every visible way like the happiest two people alive. I lifted my glass with the rest of them. I did not drink. My eyes were on Dale Sutton as the applause peaked and began to fade. He set his tray down on the service station beside the kitchen door. He said something brief to the colleague nearest him. The colleague nodded without paying much attention. Then Dale pulled open the kitchen door and stepped through it. He did not come back out. The jazz quartet shifted into something with a little more pace. The room brightened around it. Savannah laughed at something Preston said and tilted her head back the way she always did when something genuinely delighted her. I set my glass on the nearest table and began moving toward the east alcove. There are moments in a life when everything around you continues exactly as it was: the music, the laughter, the warm light falling across 300 people who have no idea. And you move through it all like a man walking through water. Each step deliberate, the world slightly slower than it should be, because what you are about to confirm will make everything before it irreversible. I told the head waiter I wanted to preview the dessert presentation before service began. It was a reasonable request, the kind of thing a particular host does at a formal event, checking the arrangement, ensuring the details meet the standard of the occasion. He smiled with practiced graciousness and stepped back to give me space. The dessert staging alcove occupied the east end of the main hall, partially screened from the guest area by a low architectural partition that Eleanor had insisted on during the 2009 renovation. She said every event needed a backstage somewhere. The mechanics of hospitality could live without being visible to the people it was serving. 3 long tables dressed in floor-length white linen. Individual dessert portions arranged by table assignment in neat rows, miniature pecan tarts, chocolate mousses in small glass cups, petit fours wrapped in pale gold. The wedding cake standing at the center, 4 tiers of ivory fondant sugar roses at each level trailing greenery at the base. The pastry chef had sent a photograph when it was finished. Savannah had called me laughing, saying it looked too beautiful to cut. At the left end of the center table, set slightly apart from the other portions on its own china plate, was a single slice already prepared. A small calligraphy card, the same script that ran through every detail of the wedding, read, "Father of the bride." I crossed to it slowly. I did not touch it. I did not move the plate or disturb the small sugar rose placed at the edge of the fondant. I simply leaned forward just far enough and let the air above the surface reach me. It reached me before I was ready for it, faint, layered deep beneath the sweetness of the vanilla cream, and the sugar flour beneath the rich warmth of the fondant, beneath everything placed on top of it, to make it undetectable, but unmistakable to anyone who had spent 15 years teaching themselves to find it the way other people train themselves to recognize the smell of a gas leak before the headache starts. That warm, rounded, slightly nutty depth. Almond paste worked into the filling between the cake layers where it would dissolve completely into the buttercream and become invisible to any eye, invisible to any tongue that wasn't already certain it was there. You would not taste it until the reaction had already begun. By the time you understood what was happening, the window for intervention would be closing. I straightened. I pressed one hand flat against the table edge, not because I was unsteady, but because I needed something solid while the full weight of the confirmation settled into me. Not suspicion anymore. Not a warning whispered in the early morning by a man whose motives I didn't yet fully understand. Not a number in a financial report. Proof. Physical present, undeniable proof that my daughter had arranged for me to die at her wedding, and had done it with enough care and enough knowledge of my body to make it look like a tragedy. I breathed through my nose slowly, and did not let my face change. Then I reached into my breast pocket, past the EpiPen I had put there at 7 that morning, and checked 3 times since and sent Caroline 4 words, confirmed. The cake. Now. Her reply came in under 20 seconds. Dale just came out of the kitchen. Right hand. Moving toward you. Stay where you are. I did not stay where I was. I moved to the far end of the alcove behind the floor-length linen draping of the end table, where the shadow was deep, and the angle from the kitchen side door would make me invisible to anyone approaching without first scanning the entire space. I pressed my back against the wall. I put one hand in my jacket pocket, fingers resting against the EpiPen case, not gripping it, just knowing where it was. I counted my own heartbeats. 7, 8, 9. The service door opened. Dale Sutton came through it, and the first thing I noticed was that he wasn't carrying anything. No tray, no serving equipment, nothing that would read as a routine errand. His hands were at his sides, his right fist slightly closed around something small. His jaw was set. His eyes went directly to the center table, not scanning, not searching, locked on the father of the bride plate, with the particular focus of a man who has rehearsed a single movement so many times in his mind that the physical execution of it has started to feel inevitable. He crossed the alcove in 8 steps. He reached the center table. His right hand came up from his side, and I could see it clearly from my position, a small, sealed container, pharmaceutical grade, the size of a matchbox, clear lid, pale contents. The kind of vessel used for concentrated flavor extracts in professional kitchens. I had seen Caroline's photograph of a similar product 3 hours ago when she was explaining what to look for. He glanced left. He glanced right. He did not look behind the end table. He leaned toward the father of the bride plate. I stepped out of the shadow. Dale. 1 word. Ordinary volume. The tone I use in a board meeting when I want a speaker to stop without making it a confrontation. Dale Sutton spun. The container flew from his fingers and skidded across the linen surface, coming to rest against the base of the wedding cake with a soft, precise sound. His face went the color of old plaster. His body locked knees, shoulders, jaw, every muscle seizing simultaneously in the physical response of a man who has been caught doing the thing he told himself he could go through with, and has now discovered he was wrong. We both looked at the container beside the wedding cake. Then I walked toward him, picked it up with 2 fingers, and held it between us in the amber light of the alcove. "Take a breath," I said, "and then tell me everything." His chest heaved. His eyes went to the container, to my face, to the container again. When he spoke, his voice fractured completely on the second word, split down the middle, broken open. "Mr. Hargrove, I swear to you, I swear on everything she told me, it was nothing. She said you'd feel sick for an hour. She said you'd need to go home early, and the kitchen would take the blame, and nobody would get hurt." He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, fighting something that was not going to be fought. "She swore to me your allergy was mild. She said hives may be a headache. She said she'd make sure your EpiPen was close by." "She mentioned the EpiPen specifically," I said. "Those exact words." His voice was barely holding. "And I thought if she's already thinking about the EpiPen, if she's already planning for that, then she must know. She must know it's safe. Because why would she risk her own father?" He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. He already knew why. I set the container down on the table beside the father of the bride plate. The 2 objects together, the weapon and its target, arranged in the light. "My allergy is not mild," I said. "You were told a lie." I let that land, watched it land in his face, watched the specific horror of full understanding move through him like a wave. His hand came up to press against his sternum hard, as if he could hold the weight of it outside his chest. "Savannah has known this her entire life. Every birthday, Every holiday, every restaurant we ever walked into together as a family, her mother checked every menu for this. Savannah grew up knowing exactly what this would do to me. Dale made a sound that wasn't a word, something low and physical that came from somewhere below language. The sound a person makes when the full shape of a thing arrives all at once, without any softening. He gripped the edge of the dessert table with both hands and stood there, head bowed, shoulders heaving for a long moment. "She used me," he said finally. His voice was scraped hollow. "She found a man in difficulty," I said, and gave him a version of events he could afford to believe. He looked up. His eyes were red, his face completely wrecked, and what lived in his expression now was not just terror. It was something harder and more permanent, the expression of a man who has understood fully and without any remaining possibility of comfortable interpretation what he had almost become part of. "I have 2 daughters," he said, 9 and 11. Their mother left last year. I'm all they've got. He didn't say it as mitigation. He said it the way a man names the thing he almost destroyed everything for. $20,000. She made it sound like I wasn't really doing anything. Caroline stepped out from the far edge of the alcove. She had positioned herself there 3 minutes ago, recorder running, saying nothing, gathering everything. She looked at Dale with the steady, impersonal attention of a woman who had spent 40 years watching people confront the consequences of their choices. "Dale," she said quietly, "are you willing to tell us everything? Every detail, how she approached you, exactly what she told you, what you were instructed to do and when." He straightened, his jaw set, his hands still trembling pressed flat against his sides. "Yes," he said, "every word of it." I looked at the father of the bride plate one last time. The sugar rose at its edge, still perfect, the fondant still smooth and white and innocent-looking. And then I turned away from it and began walking back toward the sound of 300 people who still believed they were at a wedding. Caroline pulled the corridor door shut behind us, and the 3 of us stood in the narrow space between the dessert tables and the kitchen wall, me, Dale Sutton, and a woman who had spent 40 years making sure the truth had somewhere to land. "Dale," Carolyn said, her voice low and precise, "before you say anything else, I want to be clear about something. I am Walter Hargrove's personal attorney. Whatever you tell us in this corridor, I will use to protect my client and to assist law enforcement. Do you understand that?" Dale nodded, his red-rimmed eyes moving between us. He had gotten himself partially back together. The shaking had settled into a fine tremor in his hands. The tears had stopped, replaced by the hollow, scoured-out look of a man who has cried everything out and is now running on something closer to necessity. "I understand," he said. "And you're telling us everything voluntarily. No one is coercing you." "No." His voice was rough but steady. "I want to tell you. I need to tell you." Caroline reached into her jacket pocket and set a small digital recorder on the edge of the dessert table. "Do I have your consent to record this conversation?" Dale looked at the recorder, then at me, then back at Caroline. "Yes," he said. "Record everything." She clicked it on. "Start from the beginning," she said. "How did Savannah Hargrove first contact you?" Dale exhaled a long, slow breath that seemed to deflate something in his chest. 3 days ago, Tuesday. We had the final catering walkthrough at the estate. The whole team came out to go over the layout, the service sequence, the kitchen setup." He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. "Most of the crew left around 4 o'clock. I stayed behind to check the refrigeration units in the east kitchen. We'd had a temperature issue at the last event, and I wanted to make sure it wouldn't happen again." "And Savannah was there," I said. "She came into the kitchen about 10 minutes after everyone else left." His jaw tightened at the memory. "She was very calm, very friendly. Said she was glad she caught me alone, said she had a special request for the reception, and she'd prefer to handle it quietly rather than going through the catering company." "Did that seem strange to you?" Caroline asked. "A little. But wealthy clients make unusual requests all the time." Off-menu items, dietary substitutions, personal preferences they don't want publicized. I figured it was something like that. He pressed his lips together. She said she wanted to do something special for her father's dessert. Said you had a difficult relationship with almonds, and she wanted to include just a touch of almond flavor in your personal cake slice as a private joke between the two of you. She said you'd understand what it meant. The words landed in my chest like something physical. A private joke. My daughter had described planning to kill me as a private joke between the two of us. And you didn't question it? I asked, keeping my voice level through an effort that cost me considerably. I questioned the allergy part. Dale said, his voice rising slightly with the urgency of wanting to be believed. I said, Mr. Hargrove, I know you have an almond allergy. It's in the client brief. It's on the catering notes. I said I was uncomfortable with anything involving a known allergen. He swallowed hard. She looked me straight in the eye and said, Dale, my father's allergy is very mild. A small amount of almond flavoring in the filling will cause a little discomfort at most. He'll feel off, he'll want to go home early, and that's exactly what I need. I'll make sure his EpiPen is nearby just in case. No one will be in any real danger. Caroline leaned forward slightly. She specifically mentioned the EpiPen. Yes. Dale's voice was firm on this point, his eyes clear. She said those exact words, I'll make sure his EpiPen is nearby just in case. Like she'd thought of everything. Like she was being responsible. A short, humorless sound escaped him, almost a laugh, nothing like one. And I thought if she's that calm about it, if she's already thinking about the EpiPen, then maybe she really does know his allergy better than I do. How much did she offer you? Caroline asked. $20,000. 10 up front, 10 when it was done. Dale reached into his jacket and withdrew his phone, unlocking it with trembling fingers. She transferred the first $10,000 to my account the same night, and she sent me the instructions in a text message. He held the phone out to Caroline, screen facing her. It's all there. The time, the method, which plate to target, where she'd hidden the extract she wanted me to use. Caroline took the phone with both hands and examined the screen. Her expression didn't change. It never did in moments like this. But I watched something move through her eyes that was as close to anger as I had ever seen from her. She hid the extract herself, I asked. Tucked it behind the leg of the center dessert table under the linen, Dale said. She told me exactly where to find it, so I wouldn't have to bring anything in myself. So there'd be no record of me carrying it through security. He shook his head slowly, and in that motion, I could see the full weight of his dawning understanding that every careful detail Savannah had arranged was not caution. It was architecture. She had built this to be clean, and she had put Dale at the center of it. She thought of everything, he said quietly. Didn't she? She tried to, I said. Dale looked up at me and his eyes were wet again, not with fear this time, but with something raw and more complicated. Mr. Hargrove, I have to ask you something. And I understand if you can't answer it right now. Ask. Your daughter, did she... He stopped, pressed on. Did she know I have children? Did she know about my situation? Or did she just find me because I was convenient? The question hung in the corridor air between us. I looked at this man, this tired, frightened, decent man, who had made one catastrophically wrong decision because someone had found exactly the right combination of desperation and love to exploit. And I told him the truth. I don't know, I said, but I intend to find out. Caroline handed Dale's phone back to him. We're going to need you to stay in this corridor with me until I make a phone call, she said. Can you do that? Yes, no hesitation. If anyone from the catering team comes through, you're checking the dessert setup. That's all. She looked at him steadily. Dale, you did the right thing tonight. That matters. He nodded, jaw tight, eyes bright. He didn't look convinced. But he looked like a man who had decided to do the right thing anyway, which is sometimes harder and always more important. I picked up the vial from where Caroline had set it on the table's edge, careful 2 fingers preserving whatever it might hold, and put it in my jacket pocket. "I'll be back," I told Caroline. She met my eyes. "Savannah is at table 7. Preston is with the groomsmen near the bar." A pause. "Walter, whatever she says in that room, let her finish. Don't stop her." I straightened my jacket, took one breath, and walked back toward the sound of 300 people who still thought this was a celebration. Before I tell you what happened when I walked my daughter into that library and locked the door, drop a 10 in the comments right now. Just so I know you're still here with me. Because what she said next is something I never expected to hear from my own child. And I need you present for this part. A reminder, this story contains fictional elements woven in for depth and meaning. If that's not something you'd like to continue with, this is a comfortable place to step away, no judgment at all. Finding Savannah in a room full of 300 people had never been difficult. Even as a child, she had always been the brightest point in any space she occupied. The loudest laugh, the most expressive face, the one you found yourself watching, even when nothing particular was happening. Tonight, she was at table 7 with 4 college friends, gesturing with her champagne glass, telling some story that had the whole table leaning in. Her face was flushed with happiness, the particular glow of a woman on her wedding night, who believes the hardest part of the day is behind her. She saw me coming, and her whole face opened up. "Bah!" She caught my hand and squeezed it. "Come sit. Melissa was just asking about the estate history, and you tell it so much better than I do." "In a minute," I said, keeping my voice warm and easy. "But first I need to steal you for 5 minutes. Father-daughter tradition, I always end the night with a private word before the day officially closes." Her friends made appreciative sounds. She set down her champagne, stood, pressed a quick kiss to my cheek. "5 minutes," she told them, laughing. "He's very sentimental about traditions." She took my arm and we crossed the ballroom together. She talked the whole way about how beautiful the ceremony had been. About something funny, the Reverend said. At rehearsal, about how Preston's groomsmen arrived 20 minutes late and blamed the GPS. I listened and responded and kept my hand steady on hers, and I walked her to the library door on the ground floor and held it open. She stepped inside, still mid-sentence about the groomsmen. I closed the door, turned the small brass lock. That quiet, definitive click made her stop talking. The library was lit by the single lamp on the reading desk, casting amber light across floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. It smelled of old paper and cedar oil. Eleanor had treated these shelves every spring without fail. It was the most Eleanor room in the estate, the one where her presence still lived most stubbornly. I walked to the desk and set the vial down in the center of it. The sound it made against the wood was very small, but it landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. Savannah's eyes went to it. Something moved across her face, fast, complex, before smoothing back into careful blankness that was itself a kind of answer. "Bah," she said, her voice stripped of its earlier warmth. "What is that?" "You know what it is," I said. I pulled out the chair and sat down the way I used to when she came to me as a teenager with something difficult to say. "Sit down, Savannah." She crossed to the chair, slowly moving, the way you move when your legs aren't entirely reliable. She sat on the very edge, hands laced together in her lap, knuckles gone pale. Her eyes stayed fixed on the vial. "We caught Dale," I said. "He told us everything. I need to hear the rest from you." Something broke in her face, not dramatically, not all at once, but the slow, incremental way a wall develops cracks before it falls. Her chin trembled. Her eyes filled. "How much?" I asked. "The total. Say it out loud." 2.3 million. Barely above a whisper. Give or take. "How long?" 3 years. She exhaled, shuddering, unsteady. "It started small, Ba. I swear it started so small. Online poker, just enough to feel something on a Tuesday night, when everything felt flat. And then I won a few times, and I thought I understood it. Thought I had a system. She stopped and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. I know how that sounds. Keep going, I said. The crypto was later. Someone I trusted recommended 2 platforms. I put in everything I had saved. I thought I could fix the poker losses in one move, make it all disappear. She laughed short and fractured nothing funny in it. I lost 90% in 4 months. And the private lenders, her face contracted with pain so acute it was physical to watch. They found me. Someone referred me when I was desperate enough not to ask questions. The first loan was $400,000. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back within a year. Tears were running freely now, cutting through carefully applied makeup she'd worn all day. The interest compounded faster than anything I'd ever seen. I kept borrowing to cover the interest. And then they started calling, showing up. They threatened you. They told me what would happen if I missed another payment. Her voice dropped to something barely audible. They knew where I lived, Ba. They knew Preston's car. She pressed both hands over her face. Her shoulders heaved once hard. I was so scared for so long, and I didn't know how to tell you, because I didn't know how to be the person who had done all of this and still be your daughter. The words hit me somewhere so deep and old, I couldn't locate exactly where the pain lived. I looked at this woman I had rocked to sleep, driven to school, sat beside in hospital waiting rooms, and the love and grief and anger were so thoroughly tangled, I couldn't have separated them if I'd tried. Savannah. My voice stayed steady because it had to. Look at me. She lowered her hands. Her face was wrecked mascara tracking down both cheeks, lips, trembling eyes red and swollen and wide open the way a child's eyes get when they've been caught in something too big to explain. She looked exactly the way she had at 7 years old, when she'd broken Eleanor's favorite vase and hid the pieces under her bed. You could have come to me, I said. Any single day of 3 years you could have sat down and said, Ba, I'm in trouble, I need help. And I would have helped you. No conditions, no judgment. We would have figured it out together. Her face crumpled completely. I know, she whispered. The 2 words came out like something tearing loose. I knew it then. She pressed her fist against her sternum hard like she was trying to reach something inside. I was so ashamed. I kept thinking the next bet, the next investment, the next loan would turn it around. And then I'd never have to tell you at all. So instead, I said quietly, you decided that if I wasn't alive to find out, the problem would be solved. The words dropped into the room like stones into deep water. Savannah flinched as if I'd struck her. Her whole body contracted, shoulders pulling in, spine curving. Fresh tears came faster, and when she spoke, her voice had dissolved almost entirely. I told myself it would look like an accident, she said. I told myself the kitchen would be blamed. I said those things over and over until they started to sound reasonable. Her voice broke completely, on the last sentence shattering into something that was neither crying nor speaking. I know how monstrous that is. I know what I was going to do. And I don't have any excuse big enough for it. I just don't. I sat across the desk from my daughter and felt the specific devastation of a love that does not stop simply because it has been betrayed. My eyes burned. My chest felt hollowed out. But my voice, when it came, was the voice I needed it to be. I'm sorry, Dad. She whispered the words we had always used for the most serious apologies between us, the ones that came from somewhere below language. I'm so sorry, Ba. I'm so sorry. Before I could respond, the brass door handle moved. 2 sharp knocks, confident, unhurried. Then Preston's voice, warm and perfectly calibrated, came through the wood. Walter, Savannah, people are starting to wonder where you both went. Is everything okay in there? I watched Savannah's face as she heard his voice. Something happened in her expression that I filed away carefully, because I did not yet fully understand what it meant. I crossed the library in 4 steps and turned the brass lock. Preston Mercer stood in the doorway, jacket, perfectly pressed, face arranged into careful, measured concern. He looked from me to Savannah, then to the vial on the desk, and something moved through his eyes so quickly I almost missed it. Almost. What's going on? He stepped inside, letting the door fall shut. Savannah, you've been gone almost 20 minutes. People are starting to ask. His voice softened. Have you been crying? Savannah pressed the back of her hand against her cheek. I'm fine, she said, hollow and scraped out in a way that contradicted every word. Preston looked at this vial, then at me. Walter, what is that? You tell me, I said. He held my gaze for 2 full seconds. Then he exhaled long and slow, the breath of a man who has decided the time has come to set something heavy down. He reached into his jacket and drew out his phone. I was hoping my conversation with you this morning would be enough, he said. He held the screen toward me, hand steady, eyes pained. 3 days ago, Savannah left her iPad open on the kitchen counter. I saw the screen light up. I read it before I understood what I was reading. I took the phone. A series of text messages, Savannah's name at the top, an unknown number below. Timing method, the marking on the dessert plate, confirmation of payment received. Clinical. Precise. My stomach turned over slowly. You've had this for 3 days, I said. I've been trying to figure out what to do with it for 3 days. His voice cracked, controlled but authentically frayed. I love Savannah. I love this family. I kept telling myself I'd misunderstood. But this morning I couldn't keep telling myself that anymore. Savannah stared at him with an expression I couldn't categorize, not rage, not gratitude, not grief. Something more complicated than any single word. Her hands pressed flat against her thighs as if she needed something solid beneath her palms. So you went to my father, she said quietly. I didn't know what else to do. He turned to her, eyes, bright face open, full of what looked for all the world like genuine heartbreak. I cannot watch you destroy your life and your father's life and call it love. Savannah flinched, as if the word had touched something raw. Her chin trembled. She looked toward the window, toward the darkness outside it. We need to call the police, Preston said, turning back to me. Tonight, right now, I'll give them everything, the message's full cooperation. I looked at this man, steady hands, clear voice, perfectly calibrated emotion, and I thought about what Caroline had told me that morning. Composed men who show up to deliver warnings they could have delivered the night before deserve a second look. Before we make any calls, I said, keeping my voice easy, I want to make sure I have the sequence right. I handed his phone back. The almond extract, Dale had hidden it somewhere in the kitchen. A refrigeration unit, I think you mentioned. That's what the messages suggested, he said. Some kind of cold storage near the prep area. I let one beat pass. Just one. Right, I said. I thought that was what you said. I reached into my pocket and typed 4 words to Caroline. Come in. Now, please. 10 seconds later, a soft knock. I opened the door. Caroline stepped inside, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, wearing the expression of a woman who has been waiting patiently in a hallway for exactly this moment. She looked at Preston the way she looked at exhibits in a courtroom, precise, impersonal. Mr. Mercer, she said pleasantly. I'm glad you're here. She set her briefcase on the desk beside the vial and looked at me. Walter, why don't you ask Preston the question you were working up to? The library had never felt smaller. 4 people, 1 desk, and the kind of air that settles into a room when everyone knows what comes next cannot be undone. I kept my voice conversational. Let me make sure I have the details straight. The almond extract, I think I said it was in the refrigeration unit, but I may have gotten that wrong. I tilted my head. Where exactly was it? Preston answered without blinking. Under the prep counter, 2nd cabinet from the left near the back wall. He said it the way you say something you know. The room went still. Savannah's head turned toward him slowly. Preston heard himself. I watched it happen, watched the moment his own words landed back in his ears. The composure didn't shatter. It was too well built. But a muscle in his jaw contracted once sharply, and his eyes moved just a fraction toward the door. "That's very specific," I said pleasantly, "for information you said came from a text message." The messages were detailed. I'm paraphrasing. "Of course." I looked at Caroline. She placed her phone face up on the desk. A hand-drawn diagram of the estate kitchen filled the screen, prep counter circled in red, second cabinet marked with an arrow. Below it, a timestamp and sender ID. "This was sent to your personal cell phone from a number registered to a prepaid burner account," Carolyn said with the calm of someone reading from a court document. "Wednesday, October 8th, 10 days before the wedding. 4 days before you told Walter you found Savannah's messages on her iPad. Savannah's phone records show an outgoing call to that same number on the evening of October 7th. Savannah made a sound, not a word, something that comes from the chest before language gets involved. She stared at the screen with her hand pressed over her mouth, eyes filling with a horror different from anything she'd shown before. Not grief. The specific horror of understanding something that reshapes everything. "Who sent you that?" she asked, her voice barely holding. Preston's mouth opened and closed. A man finding the ground shift beneath him, searching for somewhere new to stand. "It's not what it looks like," he said. "Then tell me what it looks like," I said. "Because from where I'm standing, someone sent you the exact location of the murder weapon 10 days ago. You didn't call the police. You didn't tell me. You went into my kitchen last night at 11:47. I watched the flicker cross his face. Checked it yourself, then knocked on my door this morning and said just enough to look like the hero while leaving everything else in place." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a man running out of moves. Preston straightened his jacket, reaching for the physical version of composure when the internal version had stopped cooperating. "I want to speak to an attorney." "Absolutely, you're right," Caroline said. "You'll have every opportunity." She picked up her phone. "I have a duty detective at Chatham County Sheriff's Office on speed dial. I suggest you use the next 3 minutes to consider whether there's anything you want to say to Walter and Savannah before this moves somewhere far more formal." Preston looked at Savannah. She stared back, not with rage, not with tears, but with the expression of someone watching a building they loved collapse in slow motion. "Did you know?" she asked. "From the beginning, did you know about my debts?" 3 full seconds. For the first time all evening, his face went genuinely still. No calculation, no performance. "I knew enough," he said. Savannah's breath left her in one long, shuddering exhale. Her hand dropped. Her shoulders dropped. Something went out of her posture I wasn't sure would come back. "You let me believe I had no other choice," she said. "Savannah, don't." The word cut clean across whatever he'd been about to say. Her eyes were burning and absolutely clear. "Don't say my name right now." Caroline was already dialing. Caroline set her briefcase on the desk and clicked it open with the unhurried precision of someone who had been waiting all day to do exactly this. "Before the police arrive," she said, "I want everyone in this room to have a complete picture." She looked at Preston. "Particularly you." Preston had taken the leather wingback in the corner and crossed one leg over the other with the studied ease of a man who has decided stillness is his best remaining strategy. "I'd prefer to have counsel present before." "You're not being questioned," Caroline said pleasantly. "I'm simply sharing information." She drew a thick manila folder from the briefcase and laid it open on the desk. "Savannah, I need you to look at these." Savannah moved toward the desk like someone walking through deep water, arms crossed tight over her chest, her wedding dress incongruous and heartbreaking in the amber lamplight. She looked down at the printed pages. "Text messages," Caroline said, "sent from Preston's number to yours over approximately 36 months. Verified and time-stamped." She pointed to the first highlighted entry. "February 3rd, 2023. Read it aloud, please." Savannah's voice came out thin. Don't stress about dinner, though. I did overhear your dad on a call this afternoon talking to someone about the estate plan. Sounded serious. Probably nothing, but thought you should know. She looked up. I remember this. I asked you about it, and you said you weren't sure what you'd heard. Walter, Caroline said, were you discussing your estate plan on February 3rd? I was in Boston, I said, closing the Midtown acquisition. I didn't speak to my attorney until the following Monday. Savannah set the page down very slowly. He made it up, she said. Not a question. A woman doing arithmetic and arriving at a number she doesn't want. June 17th, 2023, Caroline said and pointed to the next sheet. Savannah's hands were trembling as she read, Your dad pulled me aside tonight and asked pointed questions about your finances. I covered for you, but I think he's suspicious. She pressed both hands flat on the desk. He never did that. She looked at me. Did he? Never, I said. The word tasted like ash. Savannah picked up the third sheet, her jaw-tight neck muscles working with the effort of keeping herself together. Bo's meeting with the family attorney tomorrow. He seemed tense. You know how he gets when he's reconsidering things. She set it down. When? November 29th, 2024, Caroline said. Walter. Chicago, I said. Industry conference. I flew back on the 30th. Savannah turned to look at Preston. He met her gaze with the perfectly composed expression of a man who has decided no reaction is the safest reaction. But her eyes were filling now, not with soft grief, but with something harder and hotter, the tears of a woman whose sorrow was curdling into something else entirely. You told me he was going to cut me out of the will, she said, her voice climbing. 3-4 times over 2 years, you said you'd overheard things, seen documents, noticed him pulling away. You said he was disappointed in me. Each sentence came out louder, more fractured. I was already drowning, and you kept telling me the one person who could have saved me was about to abandon me. Savannah, Preston started. Don't. The word cracked out of her like a gunshot. Don't use that voice with me. She was crying in earnest now, tears streaking hot down both cheeks, her whole body shaking. I was so scared of losing him, Preston. You made me believe my father didn't love me anymore. She pressed her fist hard against her sternum knuckles, going white. You made me believe I had nothing left to lose. Preston said nothing. His expression didn't crack, but his hands pressed fractionally harder into the leather chair arms, the only tell left to him. Caroline reached back into the briefcase and drew out a second folder thicker than the first and set it on the desk with a weight that drew every eye in the room. There's more, she said, and I think you both need to see it. Outside the library windows, the reception had thinned, fewer voices, quieter music, a party reaching its natural limit. 300 people were finishing their champagne and reaching for their coats, completely unaware that in this room the real event of the evening was only now reaching its center. Caroline opened her laptop. The pale blue light fell across all four of us. Thomas Walter's estate manager reviewed the security footage at my request, she said. This is the Hargrove Estate Kitchen East entrance. Timestamp 11:47 p.m. October 17th. The footage was sharp and clear. A figure entered from the garden side door, baseball cap, pulled low black jacket. The build and the walk were unmistakable to anyone who had spent the past 6 hours watching the same man charm 300 wedding guests. That's Preston, Savannah said. Her voice had gone completely flat, the way a voice goes when feeling has exceeded the body's capacity to express it. On screen, the figure moved through the kitchen with the purposeful efficiency of someone who knew the layout exactly. He went directly to the prep counter, crouched, opened the second cabinet from the left, checked something inside and straightened. A pause of 4 seconds, just long enough to confirm the plan was still on track. Then he walked back out. The whole thing lasted less than 90 seconds. He didn't move it, I said. He just checked that it was there. He went in to confirm the plan, not to stop it. Savannah had both hands pressed over her mouth, shoulders heaving with controlled breathing, in through the nose, out slowly, the technique Eleanor had taught her for panic attacks when she was 14. Her eyes stayed fixed on the frozen screen long after the footage ended. Preston had gone absolutely still in his chair. Caroline closed the laptop and laid the second folder open across the desk, documents spread in a single deliberate sweep, every page visible at once. These arrived at my office in April, routed through a third-party Atlanta law firm, she said. A draft power of attorney for operational management of Hargrove Properties, a proposed executive board restructuring plan, a preliminary list of new business partners. She looked directly at Preston. Dated April 14, 2025, 6 months before today's wedding. Savannah's color drained in a slow, terrible tide. 6 months ago, she said. We'd only been engaged for 2 months. 4 months before you were married, Caroline confirmed. Preston had already prepared documentation to assume operational control of Hargrove Properties. Savannah turned and looked at Preston, the way you look at a painting when you've been told it's a forgery and you're searching for the brushstroke that should have told you sooner. Her face wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. What lived in her face was the raw, exposed expression of a woman dismantling everything she thought she understood about the last 3 years of her life, piece by piece in real time. You planned this before we were even married, she said. Not an accusation, an accounting. Preston's composed mask remained but thinner now, ice over water that had been moving underneath all along. Say something real to me, Savannah said, her voice fracturing on the last word. Just once. One true thing. A long beat. His fingers pressed hard into the chair arms. I would have been good for the company, he said finally. I genuinely believed that. The breath Savannah drew after those words was the sharpest sound in the room. She stood, turned her body away from him, no speech, no drama, just the simple physical act of removing him from her line of sight, and walked to the bookshelf. She stood with one hand braced against the spines of old books, head down, breathing. Walter. Caroline's voice was quiet, her eyes carrying the expression she reserved for moments when the legal machinery had done everything it could and the rest was human. The police will be here in approximately 10 minutes. I stood. I straightened my jacket. I looked at Preston, the man who had sat at my table, shaken my hand, and called me Walter, with the easy warmth of a son. I spent 40 years building Hargrove Properties for my family, I said. For Eleanor. So that what I built would outlast me. I held the vial up between us for one moment. You looked at all of that and saw an acquisition target. Walter, don't, I said. I turned to Savannah. Her back was still to the room, hand still on the bookshelf. Savannah. Her shoulders pulled inward slightly, listening. I love you. That part has not changed. She made a sound against the bookshelf that might have been my name. I put the vial in my pocket and walked out toward 300 people who deserved to know the truth. The hallway between the library and the ballroom was 40 feet long, maybe less, but I had never walked 40 feet that felt so much like a final sentence. It was 22 minutes past 10 when I pushed through the corridor doors. I knew, because I caught the grandfather clock near the east wing entrance, the one with the brass face Eleanor had shipped from a Charleston estate sale 30 years ago. The reception had been running for hours. 300 guests sat bathed in candlelight, comfortable and warm, completely unaware that the evening had already ended for the people at the center of it. I stopped at the ballroom threshold and pressed one hand flat against the gilded frame. Gerald Ashton spotted me first, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, one of the first men who had ever shaken my hand when I was still building Hargrove Properties from a single office on Bull Street. He half rose from his chair with that wide, easy grin. Walter, we thought you'd gotten lost. They're about to bring out the champagne. I gripped his shoulder and kept my voice low. I need a minute with the room, Gerald. All of them. The grin faded. He searched my face. Walter, what? Stay close, I said. Please. I crossed to the band leader and told him quietly to stop the music. He raised one hand. The quartet wound down mid-phrase, the cello's last note dissolving into the sudden stillness of 300 people realizing all at once that something had shifted. I picked up the standing microphone. Good evening. My voice came out steadier than I deserved. I want to thank each of you for being here tonight. The travel, the time, the generosity, I will not forget it. I pressed forward before the warmth in the room could make me hesitate. I have to share something with you directly. Tonight's wedding ceremony will not be continuing. The laughter that had been building died immediately. A woman near the center pressed her hand over her mouth. The murmur that followed was low and immediate, 300 people exhaling their confusion at once. A man from Preston's guest list stood up, jaw set hard. Mr. Hargrove, where is Preston? What does that mean? Preston Mercer is currently speaking with law enforcement, I said. That is all I can share at this time. Chairs scraped. Someone dropped a fork. Gerald was already moving toward me, his face ashen. He gripped my forearm with both hands. Are you safe? He whispered. Something behind my eyes burned that deep ache I hadn't felt since the morning I stood at Eleanor's hospital bedside and understood she wasn't coming home. My vision went wet at the edges. I blinked hard. I'm safe, I said. My voice cracked on the second word. Thank you for asking that, Gerald. I stepped back to the microphone one last time. Please stay. Enjoy the dinner. The Hargrove family will be in touch with each of you personally. I set the microphone down. Thank you for your grace tonight. I walked toward the side corridor. No one stopped me. I passed the catering station, the floral arrangements, the untouched wedding cake still sitting in its place of honor at the far table. I did not look at the cake. Caroline materialized at my elbow the moment I reached the corridor. Detective Okafor is in the East Wing. He'll need your statement within the hour. Savannah, still in the library. She's not running. Caroline paused. She sat down on the floor, and she hasn't moved. The image hit me somewhere below the sternum. I put one hand against the corridor wall, not because I was falling, but because I needed something real under my palm. Then Caroline held out a small black USB drive no larger than my thumb. Eleanor left this. My instructions were to give it to you when you needed it most. Her voice dropped. I believe that's now. My fingers closed around it. It was warm from sitting inside the briefcase, warm in a way that went straight through me like holding something still alive. The screening room, Carolyn said quietly. I've already set everything up. I closed my fingers around the drive and walked. Eleanor had called it the story room. She insisted on building it during the 2013 renovation. Every house needs a room where stories live, she had told me, otherwise all the important things just drift away. I had teased her about it for years. I had never once walked past that door without thinking of her. I had not been inside since the morning after her funeral. When I pushed the door open just before 11 that night, the smell reached me first, cedar paneling, a ghost of her perfume, the dry warmth of a space carefully preserved. The velvet love seat faced the projection screen Caroline had already pulled down and illuminated. The room felt in a way I couldn't explain, like it was still waiting for her. Caroline had brought Savannah here while I was with the guests I had asked her to, in the 4 words I typed, before stepping into the ballroom. Savannah stood in the center of the room in her wedding gown, ivory satin, now creased and trailing her hair half undone, her arms wrapped tight across her own chest. You didn't have to let me be here for this, she whispered. You're still my daughter, I said. Not warmly, plainly. Sit down. She perched at the very edge of the love seat, as though she had no right to settle fully into anything in this room. Caroline sat at the side table, laptop open, USB drive inserted. When she looked up at me, her professional composure slipped just enough to show the grief underneath. She had known Eleanor for 20 years. "Ready when you are," she said. I lowered myself into the armchair, pressed my palms against my thighs, and said, "Play it." The screen lit up. Eleanor appeared. She was at her writing desk in our old Forsyth Park house, the bookshelves organized by color. The ugly brass lamp with the green shade she had kept, despite everything I said about it. The watercolor of the Georgia coast above the window. She looked directly into the camera and smiled. Not a performance. Just Eleanor's real smile, the one that made everything feel slightly less impossible. "Hello, my love," she said. Beside me, Savannah made a fractured sound and pressed both hands over her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks immediately. Her shoulders caved. Her whole body shook. I kept my eyes on the screen. My throat had closed completely, a burning knot lodged just below my jaw. I breathed through my nose and held on. Eleanor spoke to Savannah first, about fear, about love that runs out, about teaching her daughter to be afraid without meaning to. I have been sorry for it every day since I understood what I'd done. "Mama!" Savannah's voice was wrecked, barely a breath. "Mama, I'm so sorry." The recording couldn't hear her. Eleanor's voice steadied. The trust amendment appeared on screen beside her December 4th, 2023. Any beneficiary who acted to harm Walter Hargrove forfeited their place entirely. Hargrove properties to be dissolved and transferred to the Eleanor Hargrove Charitable Trust Education Housing Community Development. This was always where it was going. I just hoped we'd get there together over coffee. Then Eleanor looked into the lens one last time and said only to me, "You will carry this. That is what you have always done. Replace the armchair. Don't eat alone. Take care of what's left. I love you both. That part doesn't have conditions." The screen went dark. Savannah sat folded forward, crying in a way that had moved past sound into something purely physical, her whole frame trembling. I rose, crossed the room, and sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched. After a long moment, her hand found mine. Tentative. Shaking. I turned my palm up and let her hold it. "What happens now?" she whispered. I looked at the empty chair on the dark screen and breathed in cedar-old perfume, the quiet of a room that had held too much. "Now," I said, "we figure out what we're left with." The East Wing sitting room smelled of floor wax and nervous energy. Detective Marcus Okafor of the Chatham County Sheriff's Office was already seated when Caroline and I walked in just before 11. A legal pad open across his knee, a recorder placed squarely on the table between us. He was compact, mid-40s, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent 2 decades listening to things people wished they didn't have to say. He stood when I entered and extended his hand. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm sorry for the circumstances." "So am I said. I shook it and sat down. My knees ached. My chest felt hollowed out. "Let's get through this." He clicked the recorder on and asked me to walk through the evening from the beginning. I had given statements before depositions, board testimony. I knew how to organize a narrative. But sitting in that chair, describing in precise sequential terms what my daughter had done to me, was the hardest thing I had done since signing Eleanor's death certificate. I started at the beginning. Preston's warning that morning, "Don't eat the cake," delivered casually, like a man mentioning the weather, then gone before I could ask a follow-up. Caroline's discovery of the wire transfer to Dale Sutton. The almond vial in the corridor. Dale's confession in the service hallway. "Mr. Sutton made that statement voluntarily?" Okafor asked. "He did," Carolyn said. "Audio recording on my phone, one-party consent, Georgia statute." She slid a sealed evidence envelope across the table. "The vial is also inside. Chain of custody documented." I walked him through the library, next Savannah's confession, the debt the shape of desperation she had described. Something behind Okafor's eyes tightened as I spoke. I found out later he had 2 daughters of his own. Then I reached Preston. "He entered the library voluntarily," I said. "Presented himself as a concerned witness. But I deliberately gave him wrong information. I told him the almond extract was mixed into the top-tier fondant. Okafor's pen paused, and he corrected me without hesitation, said it was in the filling between the second and third tiers. My voice stayed level. That's detail only someone involved in the preparation could have known. Caroline opened her briefcase. Time-stamped photo of a hand-drawn kitchen diagram taken on Preston Mercer's phone at 11:47 p.m. October 8th, 10 days before the wedding. Metadata verified. She placed it on the table, then added a second document. Corporate restructuring papers in Preston's name executed April 14th. They designate him interim executive director of Hargrove Properties upon the primary stakeholder's incapacitation or death. The word death landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Okafor looked at the documents, then at me. We have grounds for conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, potentially attempted murder in the first degree for Mr. Mercer. Mr. Sutton is a material witness. Ms. Hargrove's culpability goes to the district attorney. My jaw tightened. My eyes stung. I understand. I placed the black USB drive on the table. My late wife's recorded trust amendment, relevant to civil proceedings. Okafor pocketed it, buttoned his jacket. He paused at the door just a beat, just enough. I'm sorry, Mr. Hargrove, about all of it. So am I said. The words scraped past the knot in my throat that hadn't loosened since the screening room. He walked out. 30 seconds later, I heard footsteps moving through the corridor. Measured deliberate, the sound of consequence traveling through a house that had once belonged to celebration. Then Preston Mercer's voice, clear and controlled. I want my attorney. That was the last thing he said inside Hargrove Estate. 3 weeks after the wedding, that never happened, I drove myself to the Chatham County Detention Center on a Tuesday morning in November. The Georgia sky was flat and gray, the color of a season that couldn't quite commit to winter. I had not seen Savannah since the screening room. Caroline had advised against early contact, not for legal reasons, but because she knew me well enough to understand I needed time to figure out what I actually felt before I sat across from my daughter and tried to say it. I had spent those 3 weeks in the old Forsyth Park house, the one we sold, and then I quietly repurchased after Eleanor died, because I couldn't bear the estate alone. Every night I ate at the kitchen table by myself and thought about what it meant to love someone who had tried to kill you. I still didn't have a clean answer, but I decided that not having one wasn't a reason to stay away. The visitation room was institutional, and pale plastic chairs, fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly unwell. When the door opened and Savannah walked in, something in my chest stopped moving. She was in facility-issued gray, her hair pulled back plain, nothing left of the ivory satin and pearl pins from that night. The swelling around her eyes had faded, but her eyes themselves were different, quieter, stripped of that particular brightness I had always read in hindsight as the shine of someone performing their own life. She looked smaller. She also looked, for the first time in years, genuinely like herself. She sat down and folded her hands on the table. Her chin was steady. Her knuckles had gone white. "You came?" she said. "I said I would." Her eyes went bright and wet immediately. "I didn't know if you meant it." "Savannah," I leaned forward, "I don't say things I don't mean. You know that about me." Her jaw tightened. She pressed her lips together hard, then lost the fight entirely. The tears came fast, rolling down both cheeks unchecked. I told her plainly, conspiracy charges, Preston facing attempted murder in the first degree. Eleanor's trust amendment, removing her from the estate, Hargrove Properties, converting to a charitable foundation beginning the following week. "I want you to hear all of that from me," I said, "not from a document." Her throat moved. "I understand. What I haven't decided yet," and here my voice cracked just slightly, "is what comes after this. Between you and me, I can't give you that answer today." Her face crumpled completely. "That's fair, Dad. That's completely fair. What I can tell you," I said, "is that I came. And I'll come back." I reached across and put my hand over both of hers, warm, deliberate. That's what I have right now. It's not everything, but it's real. She turned her hands over and held on tight, and desperate, the grip of someone who knows they have no right to ask, and asks anyway. I let her. An hour later, I sat alone in my car in the parking lot. The gray sky pressed flat and quiet above me. I thought about Eleanor's voice on that screen, take care of what's left. I thought about 40 years building a company and how it felt to sign it into something larger than my own name. I thought about my daughter's hands turning over in mine. Then I started the engine and drove toward whatever came next. I am 70 years old. I have built a company, buried a wife, and sat across a visitation table from the daughter who tried to kill me and held her hand anyway. If there is anything I can offer you from all of that, it is this: secrets carried alone will always find the most destructive exit. Savannah did not become a person capable of what she planned overnight. She became that person slowly, one unspoken shame at a time, one unanswered prayer at a time. I believe God gives us people, fathers, mothers, friends, lawyers named Caroline, precisely so that we do not have to carry the unbearable alone. The tragedy is not that Savannah was in trouble. The tragedy is that she was in trouble for 3 years, inside a house with an open door, and never once walked through it. So I will say plainly what I wish someone had said to her sooner: don't be like me. Don't build walls so tall around your dignity that your children are afraid to show you their failures. Open the door before they feel they have no other way out. These family drama revenge stories, and I have lived one, are never really about money or inheritance or companies. They are about people who stopped talking to each other long before anything broke. The family story's revenge cycle begins in silence and ends in courtrooms. I know. I have sat in both. My personal belief is simple. No estate, no company, no legacy is worth more than a single honest conversation at the right moment. The family drama revenge you see in these stories is always the price of conversations that never happened. And family stories' revenge always costs more than anyone budgeted for. If this story moved you, made you think, or made you hold someone you love a little tighter tonight, leave a comment below and tell me which moment stayed with you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. Stories like this one are waiting for you, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Thank you truly for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And before you go, a note: the stories ahead contain fictional elements constructed entirely for reflection and understanding. If that's not the content you're looking for right now, please feel free to step away and find something that serves you better. No hard feelings, and take good care of yourself.